Good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started going over this inequalities quiz review. So I'm going to go over kind of one of each type and a couple other extra problems as well, just to give you a good kind of review before you take your quiz. I'll also at the end of this video show you your entire answer key as well. So we'll start here with number one. Number one says to vote in presidential elections in the United States, citizens must be at least 18 years of age. We need a right and inequality to represent this situation. So I know I'm going to have a variable. I'm going to call it X. That X is going to represent the age of our citizen that we are talking about. Now what I have to decide is that X and the 18 are going to be related to each other. I have to decide what symbol goes in the middle. Is it a less than? Is it a greater than? And then do I have the equal to based on that as well? So when they say at least can be kind of a weird word to with, but if we think about what can happen here, if I'm less than, that would mean that only people that are under the age of 18 can vote. If I'm greater than, that means that only people that are older than 18 can vote. This is what our at least actually means, is that we are actually greater than our 18. Now, at least also has that second part of, well, can it actually be equal to 18? Well, and we know that if you think about context, that if you are 18, you are able to vote. So I am going to say that this is equal to, so that is going to be a greater than or equal to on my graph there. Let's jump down to number 7 here. Number 7 is one of our solving inequalities. So the first thing I need to do, this one has this group that's in parentheses. So I need to start by distributing that -3 through to both groups inside. So -3 times x gives me a -3x, and -3 times 1 gives me a -3. And I still have my less than or equal to 9. If I go ahead and start to solve that, I'm going to add my 3 to both sides, which gives me -3x is less than or equal to 12. From here, my final step is going to be simply divide by my -3, and I get x, and then I have to switch my inequality symbol because I did just divide by a negative number, so this is now going to be greater than or equal to, and 12 divided by a -3 is a -4. So quickly just reviewing what we did here, I'm solving this just like I do an equation. Solve all the way through, get my regular number over to the other side, divide by anything that's in front of your variable. Once I do that, x is by itself, and I have the -4, and I did switch my inequality because I divided by a negative. I would also have to do this if I multiplied both sides by a negative. Okay, so I go with my greater than -4. I'm going to put -4 right in the middle of my number line, and then -3, -2, and -1 all go to the right. -5, -6, and -7 all go to the left. This is going to be an equal to inequality, so I am going to have that filled in or closed circle, and I am greater than, which means I am going to the right. So there's your graph. The next two we're going to talk about are on the back of this page. We're going to talk about both 9 and 10. They are the same type of question that we're asked to graph each compound inequality, but they're slightly different in the way that they're set up. So I wanted to do both of these. So first of all, with number 9, this symbol in the middle here is a union, which means or in other words, I am graphing everything. I need to graph just both of these pieces separately. So this is my double compound inequality, which means between. I start with my number that is an open circle because it is just less than. Then I have a less than or equal to at the 2, so that is going to be a closed circle. And I mark everything in between with that line connecting the 2. Finally, I have the x is greater than 4. So I'm going to put a open circle at 4, and greater than goes out to the right. And there is my graph. And now this one I don't have to worry about combining those together because this is everything, or an or union. I just simply draw my 2 graphs and I have my answer. Number 10 is going to be slightly different. I have my other symbol here. This is an intersection, which means and, or I'm looking for the overlap between my 2 graphs. So I'm going to go ahead and graph both of these and we'll see where they're overlapping. So we'll start with the 4. I have an open circle at 4 going to the left. And then 1, I have a closed circle that is also going to the left. So if I look at where I have my overlap, and you can kind of see it here by the way I drew this, that my overlap is only happening from 1 all the way to the left. Everything between 4 and 1 is really just this first graph. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that because that's not overlapping. So my final picture here is going to just be from 1 and down to the left. Looking at number 14 is the next one we're going to do. Our directions here are to represent each graph as an inequality, and then to give 2 points that are a part of our solution. So first of all, this graph is shaded above. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but we are talking about above this graph. Because we are talking about above our line, I know that my y is going to be greater than, and because it is a solid line as opposed to a dashed line, I am going to say that it's equal to as well. So this y is going to be greater than or equal to. Then it becomes just writing out this equation. Now we always write our equations here for our inequalities in slope-intercept form. So mx plus b. My m is my slope and my b is my y-intercept. So I'm going to start with my y-intercept here. My y-intercept is the point where I cross my y-axis, which here is at a -2. So I'm going to put a -2 in there. And I'm going to also have my x, and I need to figure out what is going to go right here in front of each x. If I look for another point where I cross at a nice even intersection, there is one here at 2, -1. There's also one here at 4, 0. So I can use either one of those points. Either way, if I use kind of my rise and my run here, I'm rising 1 and I'm running 2. So if I do my slope based on that, that's a rise of 1 over a run of 2, or 1/2 for my slope. As far as 2 points that are solutions to my inequality, it's really up to you what you pick here, but I really just need to pick any points that are in my shaded area region kind of towards the top here. So a nice easy one is 0, 0. That origin is definitely a part of that solution set. And then I can pick really anything else. I'm going to go with -3, +3, which is over here on my left-hand side. On to the next page here, I'm going to do number 16. For number 16, I'm asked to simply graph the inequality on the coordinate plane. So I'm going to go ahead and start by getting my picture drawn in here. So I start with my y-intercept of a -2. And my slope for this one is just x, or really there's a 1 in front of that x, which is 1 over 1. So I'm rising 1 and running 1. So I go up 1 and over 1 for all of my points. And do the same thing going down and to the left. And I have all of my points. Now this graph is simply a greater than, there is no equal to, so this is going to be a dashed line. So I'm going to go ahead and get my ruler on here, and I'm just going to draw in kind of portions of my line. I'm not drawing in the whole thing, just some portions so that this thing looks dashed. So there is my dashed line. Then from there, I also need to shade. So this one is greater than. Now y is by itself for my greater than, so I'm looking along my y-axis. Where are my bigger numbers? Well, my bigger numbers are always going up on my y-axis, so I'm going to shade above my line here. So I'm shading this kind of upper left portion of my graph. And it doesn't have to be shaded perfectly, just shade it enough so that it's clear to me on your quiz what side you are shading. Finally, last problem that I'm going to do is number 21. So number 21, I'm going to go ahead and start to graph both of these inequalities, or both of these lines, and the shading that goes with them. But in order to do that, I need them to be in a form that I can actually graph. So to do that, I need my y's by itself. So for the first one here, I'm going to subtract my 3x on both sides, which is going to give me 2y is greater than or equal to a -3x minus 2. Now I still need to get y by itself, so I'm going to divide by 2 on everything here. And I am just dividing by a positive, so this one is going to stay a greater than. But now I have a -3 over 2x, and -2 divided by 2 is a -1. So there's my first part of my graph. I'm going to actually jump down below here to solve my other one. So I'm starting with x plus 2y is less than 2. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract an x on both sides, which gives me 2y is less than or equal to a -x plus 2. Then I'll divide by 2, divide by 2, and divide by 2. When I do that, my 2's cancel on the left-hand side there. I have y is less than or equal to a -1/2 x plus 1 for 2 over 2. Now I need to go ahead and graph both of these. So I'm going to number these. I have my first equation and my second equation. For my first one, I'm starting at a -1. So right here. And I have a -3 over 2. So I'm going to go down 3 to the right 2. Do that a couple times to get a couple more points in there. I'm also going to go up 3 into the right 2. sorry, up and to the left too. Then I'm going to draw my line here. This is an equal to, so this is going to be a solid line. So go ahead and draw my solid portion there. My arrows on both ends. This is my number 1 graph, so I'm going to label that. And then I'm looking at number 2, which I'm starting at a positive 1. And I have a slope of -1/2. So I'm going to go down 1 to the right 2, down 1 to the right 2, down to the right, down to the right, and down to the right. I'll also go up and to the left, getting the rest of my points on that graph. From there, I can go ahead and draw in my straight line. This one is going to be a solid line because I am equal to in that inequality. So there's my line. Wow, perfectly close points enough. Call it number 2. Now I have to decide where rating is at. So for number 1, I am greater than. For my that means I need to be above that line. So if I look at my line here, number 1, that is kind of my steeper line that is here. I need to be on the above this line. So I'm looking at kind of the 2 towards the right-hand side of this graph, the upper right and the bottom right. I'm going to be ignoring the upper left or the bottom left. So I'm looking at one of these 2 sections that I need to shade. My second inequality is a less than. That means I need to be below that line. So of the 2 that I have left, the one that's below my second line is this bottom right-hand portion. So kind of this narrow piece here that starts to open up into that corner. So this is my shaded portion here off to that bottom left-hand side. Alright, at this point I'm going to go ahead and show you answers for the entire quiz review. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a portion of the problems on here so that you can see the answers. Go ahead and check through them. I'm not going to wait as long as you're going to need to actually check them though. So please have the substitute pause the video for you so you can kind of check your answers. Once everyone's ready, then you can unpause it and let it go to the next section. So here is the first section. Here's numbers 1 and then 2 through 3. We'll get to 4, 5 in a second. Moving up here to the bottom of this page, here are numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7. Quick note on number 6 and number 5. Make sure that your variable does end up on the left-hand side. So I just spun these whole things around, made sure my inequality still pointed to my variables, so these both ended up being less than. On to my second page here. Top portion, all those compound inequalities. Quick note on number 11, this one is no solution because when I graph both of these, -4 to -2 is over here, greater than 1 is going to be going off to this side, and I'm looking at an intersection or an and or an overlap, and I do not have any overlap, so we simply say no solution. Bottom portions here. Quick note on these ones, these answers that I've given you here for the points are not the only answers, but they are possible options. On to the next page here. Here's numbers 15 and 16. Bottom portion of the graphs, 17 and 18. And onto my double systems of inequalities here on the back. So 18 and 19. and 20 and 21. 20 and 21, you did have to rework those inequalities a little bit to graph. Alright, last thing here real quick before we get started on your quiz, I just want to review a couple of things. If you have a less than or equal to or a greater than or equal to, okay, you are going to be using either a closed dot or a solid line. If you have simply a less than or a greater than, that is an open dot or a dashed line. This symbol here is an intersection, which means and, or we're talking about the overlap. Our U-looking symbol is a union, which means or everything. And my final reminder is going to be that whenever you multiply or divide by a negative number when dealing with inequalities, you have to flip your inequality symbol. At this point, you should be ready to take the quiz. If you have any last questions, quickly talk with your neighbors, try and figure those out, and you'll get started on your quiz.